Turning our attention to another story in the news. Well, in fact, this has been sadly making headlines for the past week. A tragic week, in fact, in the Canadian military. Defense officials investigating what could be the fourth apparent suicide of one of our soldiers. Their deaths prompted an emotional news conference in Ottawa this past week.
Please, no more of my brothers and sisters. We can't lose anymore. One is too many. 4 is a national tragedy.
Former soldier Kate McEachern says she nearly took her own life after suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. She was one of several soldiers pleading with the federal government to provide more support to veterans suffering from the illness. Soldiers are able to call a toll-free number for help, but many say they're simply told to go to hospital. Wes Arscott is a former medical technician with the Canadian Armed Forces. He served in the Army for 15 years and did 2 tours, one in Bosnia in 2003, another in Afghanistan in 2006. He knows firsthand what it means to live with PTSD. Wes joins us live from Bobcaygeon, Ontario by Skype. So Wes, as a medic, I know you were on the front lines of battle, which must have meant you saw some very difficult things. When did your PTSD symptoms actually first appear?
Well, Nancy, thanks for having me this afternoon.
Sure.
Interestingly enough, my symptoms actually didn't manifest for about a year after I'd returned to Canada. In fact, I had a completely normal life for a full year, and it wasn't until I was posted away from CFB Petawawa, very much an Army base. I was being posted out to Halifax. I was going to be working with the Navy, and it was around that time that I started having these real, unbridled bouts of anger and just panic attacks that I really wasn't sure where they were coming from, because I was having a normal life.
Yeah. So do you think it was was there a trigger that you can think of? Was it the move to Halifax, or did you just think gradually you just became more anxious and more angry?
Well, initially, I had never linked the correlation between moving to Halifax with going to Afghanistan, but later on, early in the process, as I was going through my diagnosis, it was suggested to me that some of the factors of moving, of changing locations, are very much like going on a deployment, especially for somebody who might be deploying for the first time. That it's a new environment, that it's unfamiliar. And although I don't attribute that 100% to the trigger of symptoms, I certainly think it was a contributing factor that did play into my symptoms while they manifested.
So when you realized you needed help, what kind of resources were available to you? What kind of support were you able to get?
Well, the adage of the mechanic's car being the worst in the garage, and that they should know better. And so I kind of fit that profile as a medical technician, having worked in the CF healthcare services for 12 years. I did, the soldier side of me wanted to ignore it, but the healthcare professional said, you know what, you really need to listen to yourself, and you really need to go and see somebody. So for me, it was a case of self-identifying, and of course my immediate supervisor was a physician assistant. So from a healthcare perspective and from a supervisory perspective, I had lots of supports, but I think I was in a unique position because I was a healthcare worker. Some of our other men and women who don't work in the health services may not have that same kind of understanding.
Right.
But certainly the fact that I self-identified and I worked in the healthcare system for a number of years, I knew exactly what was available to me, and I took advantage of every service that I could possibly get from the CF.
And I gather that your PTSD symptoms actually got worse after your first round of therapy. What happened?
Well, in fact, they did. I went through 10 months of therapy and thought that I was relatively stable. My psychologist and I made a plan together that I would return to work, and I did that for a period of about 10 months. And then I had a relapse of symptoms, and in fact, they were 10, 15 times worse than they were after the initial presentation. And so I went back into therapy, only this time under the care of a psychiatrist. And this time around, we tried some medication, we tried some other supports, and that was a long transition period. That lasted for almost 3 years continuously. But that wasn't, those weren't the only things that I did. I still had, my supports, my friends and my family. But I decided to take some extra steps, and I started looking into things that I could do on the outside of the military. At that time, OSIS had not become a part of the department, so I had explored that avenue. I had also explored, dogs for post-traumatic stress sufferers, because the Americans and the British have some really great success stories with that. And that led me to another area, which was the Veterans Transition Program that's actually run out of British Columbia. And did some investigating there. Got invited to participate in the first Ontario program, and I went through that program back in January of this year, and it was a complete life changer for me, in the sense that I was able to come to grips with a lot of the emotional things that I just couldn't let go. And I came to a real understanding that there is a life with post-traumatic stress, and there is a life after the Canadian Forces.
So talk more about what you've learned about post-traumatic stress, and learned about the kind of help that worked for you. You can appreciate, particularly after this past week, people are trying to understand post-traumatic stress, and they're trying to understand how they can reach out and how they can help people. So what do you think people need to know?
Well, certainly, it's not just about, the Canadian public, but it's, I really want to drive that message home to our men and women who are still not only in uniform, but maybe out of uniform, and who haven't self-identified. If I could just get across that one message, that they're not alone. In fact, this week alone, social networking has proved to be an incredible boon to those of us who are suffering. So for those who are not aware of the Facebook page Send Up the Count, that page has attracted 5,000 followers in less than a week. That speaks volumes to the outpouring of support that's there. And while that may not be professional support, sometimes professional supports, aren't always needed. Maybe it is just that friendly ear. Maybe it is just somebody that can relate to your experiences, that you can talk to. As I said earlier, with my experiences in the Veterans Transition Program, if there's one thing I've learned about soldiering, is that it's transcendent, it's multi-generational, and it doesn't matter if you served in Afghanistan in 2010, or if you served, in Korea. The bonds of soldiering transcend time, and if you're suffering, well, suffering is universal, and as somebody who has suffered and who continues to suffer, I would encourage everybody who's listening and who's watching to just reach out, call one person, make that call, pick up the phone, or make an email. Just reach out to somebody, to anybody, because you know what, you never know what other resources that person might put you in touch with.
You know what, Wes, you are really eloquent and passionate on this subject. Really appreciate you talking to us, sharing your story and your advice as well. Thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Wes Arscott is a former medical technician with the Canadian Armed Forces, speaking to us from Bobcaygeon, Ontario.